Listen closely, if you dare, because what you're about to hear was never meant for your ears. In the hidden archives of the Wisconsin Diocese, locked behind oak doors and iron keys, sits a bundle of yellowed letters and inspection reports that no bishop has ever spoken of in public. They speak of shadows in corridors where there should be none, muffled screams at midnight that no prayer could silence, and the quiet vanishing of 23 women who once pledged their souls to serve God, but found only darkness behind those convent walls. St. Mary's, a name whispered by old men who remember, a place scratched from the maps, buried beneath neat rows of official denials and rotting foundations by Lake Michigan's cold shore. Tonight, you stand at the threshold of forbidden history, a convent of horrors the Church spent more than a century and a fortune to erase. If you stay, you do so at your own risk. Because once you know what really happened inside St. Mary's, you will not see faith the same way again. And perhaps, you won't see yourself the same way either. Lean closer, I'm not here to comfort you. I'm here to pull the veil from your eyes. Are you ready to hear the secret that cost 23 sisters their lives, and countless others their sanity? Good. Step inside the gates with me. The fog is lifting. The truth waits in the cold stone halls. And once you enter, there's no going back. It began, as corruption always does, with whispers disguised as virtue. St. Mary's Convent rose from the Wisconsin wilderness like a fortress of piety, limestone walls, Gothic arches, a bell tower that scraped the sky like a dagger pointed at heaven itself. The locals, mostly Protestant farmers and lumbermen, called it the Papist fortress behind closed doors. They watched black-robed figures slip through the early dawn fog, heard Latin chants carried by the wind, a foreign tongue wrapping itself around their barns and cottages like a snake. Inside those walls, 23 young women, most no older than 25, knelt on cold floors before a Mother Superior who wore her holiness like armor. Catherine Murphy, sharp-eyed, sharp-tongued, chosen not for her kindness, but for her ability to command obedience. Bishop Quarter, ambitious and cunning, had found in her a perfect gatekeeper, an Irish immigrant hardened by Boston's brutal orphanages, now entrusted to tame the wild frontier's spiritual wilderness. At first, the convent flourished. Orphans found bread, the sick found remedies, and the Church found a foothold in Protestant territory. But every fortress has hidden chambers. Every holy song can drown out a scream if sung loud enough. By the winter of 1855, the first sister disappeared, Sister Agnes O'Connor, 22, last seen weeping before Mother Catherine's office door. Her name was never spoken in Mass again. Her bed was stripped bare by morning, her letters burned in the kitchen stove. To the villagers, she had returned to Ireland. To the convent, she simply never existed. The official word from the diocese was simple: Sister Agnes had taken ill and been relocated east for treatment. But no carriage tracks led away from the convent that night. No local coachman reported a fare. And the ground behind the west wing, where the soil stayed loose and damp near the orchard, bore marks that only the moon saw, shallow depressions like knees pressing into mud, and the drag of something heavy through brittle leaves. Inside St. Mary's, the remaining sisters were given no explanation, only more prayer, more silence, more confessions. Sister Bernardet, Agnes's closest friend, found her rosary beads wedged between floorboards beneath their cots, a tiny secret she dared not reveal. To speak out meant penance. To question meant heresy. And Mother Catherine's pale blue eyes missed nothing. Yet not all secrets could stay hidden. The orphanage children whispered of voices behind the cellar door, of soft weeping beneath the chapel floorboards when the organ swelled for morning Massachusetts. Sister Elizabeth, ever the gentle caretaker, soothed them with sweet tea and stale biscuits, promising angels watched over them. But even she avoided the cellar after dusk, her keys trembling in her apron pocket. By spring, 2 more nuns were gone. Sister Mary Collins, last seen hauling burlap sacks to the root cellar. Sister Teresa Donovan, who one night confessed to Bishop Quarter that she heard Agnes calling to her in her dreams. When dawn broke, her habit was found snagged on a nail by the orchard wall, torn, bloodied at the hem. Officially, she too had returned home. But no ship sailed that season for Ireland. And the orchard roots drank deeply that spring. By the time the leaves turned again, a hush had settled over St. Mary's like a funeral shroud that never lifted. 20 nuns remained, eyes lowered, mouths sealed behind prayers that no longer felt like salvation but chains of quiet terror. Mother Catherine preached sacrifice in every meal, every confession, every cold dawn prayer that left raw knees pressed to flagstone floors. Her sermons grew darker. Redemption, she said, required pain. Purity required pruning. And if the orchard must bear good fruit, its rotten branches must be cut away. Outside, the villagers began to wonder. Elijah Hoffman, the Lutheran elder who once spat, "Papists," under his breath, noticed fewer black habits in the garden rows. Wilhelm Schmidt, who sold firewood to the convent, swore he glimpsed a shallow trench by the orchard's edge one frosted morning, quickly hidden by Sister Margaret's thin frame, her hands still caked in wet soil as she blessed him with trembling Latin. But who would challenge the church? Who would dare accuse the shepherd of devouring the flock? Inside those walls, the remaining sisters found reasons to obey. Each had left a life behind, families they'd never see again, sins they believed only these stone walls could absolve. To run was to damn one's soul forever. So they stayed. They prayed harder. They silenced the children who woke screaming of shadows creeping through the dormitories at night. And each dawn, when the chapel bell tolled, they counted the empty places at the table, and told themselves it was God's will. It was in the winter of 1856 that the first inspector arrived, a man named Thomas Leland, dispatched quietly by the diocese in Milwaukee after whispers reached the bishop's ears that St. Mary's was losing sisters at an alarming pace. He arrived unannounced, wrapped in a thick wool coat, his boots crunching through snow that muffled the convent's secrets but couldn't silence them forever. Mother Catherine greeted him in the refectory, firelight flickering against stone walls lined with oil portraits of saints whose eyes seemed to follow Leland's every move. She poured him weak tea, offered stale bread, and spoke with the calm authority of a woman who had nothing to hide, or everything to protect. Leland asked questions. Why were there no records of the sisters' departures? Why did parishioners report half-dug trenches behind the orchard? Why did the children speak of voices under the chapel floor? Each answer came smothered in scripture, cloaked in pious deflection. The sisters, Catherine insisted, had simply been called elsewhere, to new missions, new parishes, new lives of service. She showed him forged letters, shaky signatures on crisp parchment that smelled of fresh ink and damp cellars. That night, Leland walked the convent halls alone. He listened. Beneath the chapel's marble altar, he heard it, a faint, rhythmic sound like breath catching in stone lungs. Or weeping that never ended. When he returned to the city, he submitted a report the diocese locked away immediately. Official conclusion, St. Mary's is in good standing. Unofficially, Leland never spoke of what he heard, but he never attended Mass again. Spring thawed the graveyard soil around St. Mary's, but not the secrets buried within it. By 1857, local rumor had grown teeth. Children claimed they saw figures standing in the orchard at dawn, white shapes that vanished when the bell tower struck matins. Farmers swore their dogs refused to pass the convent gates, hackles raised, eyes fixed on something unseen between the pine trunks. And still, the church said nothing. Silence is its oldest armor. Inside, Mother Catherine's grip tightened like a noose. She called more night vigils, more confessions, more penances. Any sister who questioned where her companion had gone found herself kneeling for hours in the cold chapel, fasting until her lips cracked and bled. Sister Elizabeth's warm hands grew cold as she forced the orphans to repeat catechisms louder, drowning out the echo of distant knocks from below the floorboards. Sister Margaret's infirmary filled with tonics and teas that numbed tongues and dulled thoughts, a bitter drink before bed, for restful sleep. Yet fear is a seed that grows even in the darkest soil. Sister Bernardet, the last who still whispered Agnes's name in her prayers, began to write. By flickering candlelight, she scribbled what she'd seen: the cellar doors locked from the outside, the muffled cries behind the orchard wall, Mother Catherine's voice chanting in the chapel long after the sisters slept. She folded her testimony into scraps of linen and hid them inside the children's straw mattresses, praying that if she vanished next, her truth might live on in someone's trembling hands. And she was right to pray. Because by autumn's chill, her bed lay empty too. When Sister Bernardet vanished, the remaining nuns felt the walls themselves lean in, like the stones had ears, like the bell tower watched. Mother Catherine called them to the refectory that night, her pale eyes glittering in the candlelight, her voice sweet as poison. She spoke of Judas, betrayal among the chosen, and reminded them that to doubt one's mother was to doubt God himself. Some wept as she spoke. Others clenched their hands so tight their rosary beads cut crescents into their palms. Below them, the orphans huddled in the cold dormitory, wide-eyed, tiny hands pressed to their ears as muffled sounds rose through the floorboards. Thumps. Dragging. The snap of a wooden beam splintering under weight it wasn't meant to bear. By dawn, the children were taught a new prayer, one that asked forgiveness for the sins of the disobedient. Their voices rose in fragile unison as Mother Catherine walked among them, fingers brushing their foreheads in mock blessing. Outside, the orchard trees bent under the first heavy snow. The earth around their roots, once soft and churned, froze solid again, locking secrets in a frost-bound tomb. When Thomas Leland's replacement, an inspector named Harris, came that winter, he found the convent cleaner than any monastery he'd ever seen. Floors scrubbed raw, beds perfectly made, sisters lined up like statues carved from obedience and dread. But Harris lingered too long near the cellar door. He asked too many questions about Bernardet's letters. Some scraps had found their way to a parish clerk in Milwaukee. Within a week, Harris was dead. Official cause: pneumonia from travel. Unofficially, a bottle of Sister Margaret's soothing tonic was found by his bedside, cork popped, half gone, poison sweet as mercy. By 1858, the convent's once bright promise had curdled into legend, whispered in taverns where farmers warmed their hands over whiskey, muttered by mothers who told their children never to wander near the orchard at dusk. And inside St. Mary's, the sisters prayed harder, worked harder, silenced every question that rose like bile in their throats. Mother Catherine had become more than a matriarch, she was a warden, a confessor, a judge in black habit and iron will. She alone decided which sisters were pure enough to remain and which were corrupted by doubt. And in the darkest hours, when the winds off Lake Michigan rattled windowpanes like bones in a charnel house, she whispered to Sister Elizabeth and Sister Margaret of the cleansing. They spoke in Latin, words the younger nuns were never meant to hear, but did anyway. Pressing trembling ears to wooden doors. Words about sacrifice as proof of faith. About the rot that must be cut from the root for the orchard to bear holy fruit. About cleansing sins so deep they could only be washed away in blood and soil. Outside the convent walls, Bishop Quarter's letters changed tone. What once were gentle inquiries turned sharp, even desperate, requests for proper accounting, demands for travel records, the threat of a diocesan audit. But by the time his envoys arrived, ledgers had been rewritten. Bodies were hidden deeper than any shovel could find in a single inspection. The orchard grew taller. The trees bore sweet apples that children in town would sometimes taste, never knowing the roots that fed them drank far more than rainwater. And you, watching now, are you still here? Prove it. Write this in the comments twice to mark your descent into this truth they tried to bury. I see what they buried. Twice. So the world knows you're awake now. Twice, to lock the gate behind you. So the orchard grew, fed by secrets, watered by fear. By 1859, only 15 sisters remained inside St. Mary's, and the walls seemed to close tighter with every name lost to God's will. Outside, the diocese quietly began distancing itself. The local priests who once celebrated Mass inside the convent chapel found reasons to stay away. Some claimed illness, others cited harsh roads and harsher winds. But the truth was simpler. Men who knew how to read shadows did not step where shadows swallowed them whole. Inside, the orphans grew pale and silent, eyes hollow from nights spent listening to footsteps that stopped outside their dormitory doors. Sister Elizabeth fed them well enough to keep them quiet, slipping calming tonics into their porridge. Sister Margaret, the healer turned warden, kept the cellar keys close to her breast, a rusted chain that clinked softly with every step. And Mother Catherine's sermons turned crueler. She spoke of the blessed martyrs, how some must suffer so the many may be saved. Sometimes, when the chapel doors were bolted after dusk, the sisters heard chanting from the cellar, harsh syllables that were neither Latin nor any tongue they'd learned in Massachusetts. The brave few who dared glance through the crack beneath the cellar door spoke of shapes moving by candlelight, and an altar that should not exist beneath sacred ground. Yet fear is a beast that devours its own tail. One night, a young novice named Sister Nora found the courage to run, barefoot, breath steaming in the moonlit orchard. She made it as far as the village edge before they found her. Her frozen body turned up 3 days later in a snowbank by the river. The coroner's report read, exposure. But locals swore her mouth was filled with soil, packed tight to silence her even in death. When Sister Nora's body was found, half buried by drifting snow and packed earth, the town's fragile silence began to fracture. Families who once whispered behind shuttered windows now spoke openly in the taverns, farmers, woodcutters, even the Lutheran elders. Rumors spread faster than any sermon, that St. Mary's was cursed ground, that the orchard behind its walls fed on the faithful, that those black habits hid not virtue but something far older, far darker than Catholic ritual. The diocese, desperate to contain the rot, dispatched a third inspector, a young deacon named Michael Harlan. He arrived under cover of darkness, armed not with scripture alone but with questions sharper than any bishop's blessing. He walked the orchard at dawn, boots crunching frozen roots, pressing an ear to the stone floor as the sisters sang their final prayers. What he heard turned his faith to rust, muffled sobs echoing up from the hidden vaults below the altar, a rhythmic thud like fists against wood from beneath the choir pit. Harlan confronted Mother Catherine in her own office. They say the argument lasted an hour, her voice cold and measured, his hoarse with disbelief. When he emerged, his eyes were glassy with horror, but he carried no written report, no damning ledger. He left the convent gates alone that night, the snow swallowing his footsteps behind him. His body washed ashore 2 weeks later on the icy rim of Lake Michigan, cassock torn, throat raw with soil and water. Another file stamped, accidental drowning. Another voice silenced for eternity. Inside St. Mary's, the remaining sisters gathered in the chapel as Mother Catherine ordered new locks for the orchard gate. The bell tower rang out like iron laughter into the night, tolling for the dead, tolling for the living, tolling for the sins buried in frozen earth that no one dared unearth. By 1860, St. Mary's was a fortress not of faith but of fear, a labyrinth of stone and candlelight where prayer had become a ritual mask for something older than the church itself. Only 12 sisters remained. They moved like shadows through the convent's cold halls, their eyes hollow from years of silence and the unspoken knowledge that they were all, in time, marked for the orchard. Mother Catherine, once merely a woman of iron will, now seemed more spectre than flesh. Her sermons were fevered things, twisting scripture into threats, reminders that disobedience was sin, and sin demanded sacrifice. Sister Elizabeth's once gentle hands now trembled as she doled out tonics that made the sisters sleep too deeply. Sister Margaret's infirmary became a gate through which no one returned unchanged, the sick went in and either walked out pale and silent, or didn't walk out at all. Yet beneath this suffocating dread, a seed of rebellion found root. A young novice, Sister Clare, uncovered Bernardet's final letters, scraps of testimony hidden in an orphan's straw mattress. Late at night, by guttering candle, Clare read every word, the cellar, the hidden altar, the orchard burials. And for the first time, she saw it clearly, that the walls meant to protect them were a tomb built stone by human corruption, not divine design. She gathered 2 others, Sister Joan and Sister Helena, both trembling but resolute. Together they planned what the inspectors never dared, to open the locked cellar door, to see what truly slept beneath the chapel. To bring light into the pit that had devoured so many faithful souls. They waited for the hour when the convent was deepest in prayer, when even Mother Catherine's watchful eyes were blind to the shadows slipping from their cells. But in St. Mary's, nothing hidden stayed hidden for long. And some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. When the hour came, Sister Clare led them by trembling candlelight down the stone steps behind the altar, a passage older than the convent itself, carved when the mansion was still a lumber baron's fortress, long before hymns echoed from these walls. Their feet found old iron hinges rusted shut, their breath clouded the damp air that tasted of mold and something sweeter, coppery and thick on the tongue like fresh spilled blood. The key Sister Clare had stolen from Sister Margaret's apron fit perfectly in the lock. The door groaned open like a dying animal. Beyond it, a narrow corridor braced with rotting beams, walls lined with crude shelves. And on those shelves, the truth the church never wanted the world to see, scraps of black fabric, rosaries snapped like brittle twigs, locks of hair tied with faded ribbons. Relics, not of saints, but of women silenced in the name of obedience. At the end of the corridor lay the true altar, no marble, no gold leaf, just rough stones slick with damp and dark stains that would never wash clean. Candles burned low in waxy stubs, illuminating marks carved deep into the floor, runes older than any Catholic rite, symbols of binding and sacrifice, etched by hands that pretended at holiness but fed something far older. The three sisters did not speak. They did not need to. In that pit, they felt the final pieces click into place. St. Mary's was never about saving souls, it was about feeding something hidden, masked by rosaries and Latin prayers. It was about control. Control of the mind. The body. The spirit. The orchard above was just the final lock. The true prison was belief twisted into obedience, obedience twisted into burial. But as Sister Clare turned to flee, candle trembling in her hand, she saw the fourth shadow waiting in the doorway, pale blue eyes glinting in the flickering dark. Mother Catherine did not scream. She did not curse. She simply smiled. And in that smile, they knew, no door would save them now. When dawn broke over Lake Michigan that morning, the convent bell did not ring, the orphans woke to silence so thick it pressed their tiny hearts into their ribs. Somewhere above the dormitory, footsteps echoed. Slow, deliberate, as Mother Catherine made her rounds alone. Sister Clare, Sister Joan, and Sister Helena were never seen again in daylight. No shallow trench marked their passing this time. Whatever waited beneath the cellar floor swallowed them whole, leaving not even a rumor to drift beyond the orchard fence. The remaining sisters were gathered in the refectory that night. Candle flames shivered as Mother Catherine spoke, voice low, each word slicing the hush like a blade through linen. She spoke of wolves among sheep, of serpents in Eden, of Eve's ancient betrayal and the price of knowledge never meant for mortal hands. She told them the orchard was safe now, the rot cut away, the soil sanctified again with fresh vows. Any sister who looked to run would meet the same fate. Any child who spoke of shadows would find their tongue quieted by Sister Elizabeth's calming draft. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, rattling branches against the chapel spire like ghostly fingers begging entry. In the village, rumors thickened like storm clouds. Elijah Hoffman and Wilhelm Schmidt petitioned the bishop for answers, but Milwaukee had grown tired of this distant shame. Files vanished, inspectors silenced or reassigned. Paper covers stone, stone covers bone. Inside St. Mary's, the remaining 9 sisters took new vows in the dead of night, kneeling at the hidden altar while Mother Catherine's thin hands anointed their foreheads with something warm and sticky. Not holy oil. Not wine. They rose from that pit reborn, bound tighter than any vow of chastity or poverty. They were the orchard now. And they would feed it, and keep its secrets, until the soil froze forever. By the spring of 1862, St. Mary's Convent was an empty husk to the outside world, its chapel doors locked, its gardens overgrown, the orchard thick with blossoms no villager dared touch. The diocese declared the mission abandoned, blaming the civil war for the loss of funds, the loss of faith. The children were scattered to other orphanages. The local farmers, who once brought eggs and milk, avoided the grounds altogether. And the names of the missing sisters faded from parish books like ink soaked through rotting paper. But inside those limestone walls, the truth never died. Beneath the chapel's cracked altar, the secret altar remained, a place where piety and terror fused like bone to marrow. Those last 9 sisters, or whatever they'd become, stayed hidden in the ruin, moving like ghosts between shadowed halls, whispering prayers in a tongue no priest would claim as Latin. Sometimes, on moonless nights, farmers claimed to see faint candlelight flicker behind the orchard's skeletal trees, to hear soft chanting float over the frozen fields, followed by the sudden, awful silence that meant the prayer had ended, or something had answered it. Years later, when new settlers stumbled on St. Mary's ruins, they found scraps, rosary beads crusted with something dark, scraps of habits nailed inside rotted floorboards, the orchard roots coiled around lumps of bone no one could fully count. Historians who dug too deep found themselves discredited, ruined, or simply vanished from their own stories, a pattern that repeated every generation. Some truths rot cleanly in the ground. Others crawl up through the roots and bloom again, each blossom a reminder, nothing buried stays buried forever. And still, the orchard stands, its crooked branches reaching for the sky like the frozen hands of the faithful who were never laid to rest. All you have to do is listen, if you're foolish enough to stand beneath those trees alone at dusk. Listen for the bell that hasn't rung in a century. Listen for the soil shifting beneath your feet. Listen for your own heartbeat, and pray it's the only one you hear. So here we are, you and I, standing on the crumbling threshold of St. Mary's, staring into an orchard that drank the secrets of 23 vanished souls and fed them back to the earth as roots and blossoms. Maybe you think this is just a ghost story, just another rural legend twisted by time and fear. But listen closer, feel how your skin prickles, how some hidden part of you knows that this was never just about missing nuns or rotten soil. This was about power, the kind that wraps itself in scripture, that chants prayers over shallow graves, that binds obedience to silence so tightly you forget you were ever free to speak. The church sealed away the records. Inspectors died cold and alone with soil packed in their throats. Families moved on. But somewhere out there, in a box no priest will claim, lie the final scraps of Sister Bernadette's letters, testimony scratched on linen, telling you that monsters were rosaries too, that some prayers are traps, that sometimes the orchard grows inside you long after you fled its gates. So ask yourself, what else have they buried in plain sight? Which rituals still echo behind locked doors while you kneel, eyes closed, whispering words you never chose? If 23 nuns could vanish while the world looked away, how many truths about your own life are you still refusing to see? If you've come this far, you're no longer just a listener. You're the keeper of this stain, this broken link in a chain they wanted sealed forever. So say it once more in the comments, twice, so the algorithm knows you're awake. I see what they buried. And next time you hear a bell toll where there shouldn't be one, remember this orchard. And remember what happens to the faithful who trust too blindly in walls built to hold them still, and quiet, and underground.